So coming up this weekend is going to be UFC Fight Night Rozenstruik versus Gaziev, and my predictions for this card are about 3 days late, and there is a pretty good reason for that. Over the weekend, I was actually in Australia on a family holiday, and then when I got back yesterday, I found out from Big Marcel himself that we did have an opponent for Vinicius Oliveira. I just had to wait for it to be announced. So I waited an extra day to wait for Vinicius Oliveira's fight to be announced. And also in that period of time, Klein versus Cunningham was announced. So I've got a couple more fights to talk about than what I would have if I did just record the video yesterday anyway. But before we do get into that, of course, you do have the We Want Picks premium membership. You can get a 3-day trial if you do sign up using my code ARTEM. And at the moment is actually a pretty good time to sign up. The best time to sign up for that 3-day free trial is actually at the end of the week, because that's when Angelo and Jacob have all of their bets up. The other YouTubers and the other channels have all of their articles up. I actually don't have an article up right now, but I'm going to write one today because once again, I'm 3 days late on writing my article because I've been in Australia. But anyway, there's a lot of content up there. The content usually obviously gets added up throughout the week when Angelo and Jacob make their bets. And then when people write their articles and post them there, it's all there. And also there is the AI fight predictor as well, which is pretty cool. 3-day free trial. You can cancel during that 3-day free trial. Other than that, it's $10 per month. Now let's get into the first fight of the night. Loik Rodzhabov versus Abdul-Kareem Al-Selwady. I'm going to be picking Abdul-Kareem Al-Selwady. One thing I've kind of noticed, because obviously I'm so late, everyone else has uploaded their videos. Normally I'm the first, or if I'm not the first, it's usually Angelo. So I don't actually look at anyone else's predictions before I make my video. But one thing I've noticed is I think everyone is kind of going to have the same picks throughout the whole card. I've noticed that there's not really a lot of variation between the pickers, I guess you could call them. But anyway, I'm going to go with Kareem Al-Selwady. A relatively common underdog that I've noticed has been Loik Rodzhabov, and to be fair, I think he could be a potentially good underdog. The thing about Abdul-Kareem Al-Selwady is, although I know he just completely dominated George Hardwick and made me look like a right idiot, to be honest with you, because I was very confident Hardwick was going to win. A lot of people were very confident Hardwick was going to win. I mean, Hardwick was minus 350, and he looked really bad in that fight. But the truth is, Abdul-Kareem Al-Selwady, you know, he took on some decent competition over in the Middle East, and he got dominated. He got KO'd in the first round a couple times. And then he went out there and he just kind of can-crushed in the USA at Fury FC and LFA, and then just went out there and beat Hardwick. So what I kind of had to go off was just him beating up these low-level competition in the States against these regional shows, and then all of a sudden he comes out there and just dominates Hardwick, and it's just so confusing. Loik Rodzhabov is going to be a lot bigger in this matchup, though. Rodzhabov is absolutely gigantic for lightweight. He did miss weight in his last fight, but if you look at the size of him, he's 5'11" and massive. I mean, if you look at his fight against Esteban Ridovic, that's when the size difference really does come into play. He did go out there against Mateusz Rebecki, and Rebecki just gave him no respect, really. Just kind of knocked him out on the feet, defended a couple takedowns, and Rodzhabov had nothing really for him. Kareem Al-Selwady, the way that he beat George Hardwick, I think, is actually going to be a very similar way to how I think he beats Loik Rodzhabov, because the way that Kareem Al-Selwady beat Hardwick was he was just constantly pressuring and constantly putting George Hardwick on the back foot. And Hardwick just had no option. It was almost like Hardwick had never really been pressured like this before. Selwady was just kind of storming forward, was throwing punches, was putting pressure on him. And Hardwick looked bad on the back foot. Rodzhabov, I know for a fact, looks bad on the back foot. Rebecki, when he was backing up Rodzhabov was just not the same fighter anymore. I think if Kareem Al-Selwady can go out there and put the pressure on Rodzhabov, defend the takedowns, which are inevitably going to come, I think we can see Abdul-Kareem Al-Selwady get his first UFC win in his debut, and maybe he could be a pretty good prospect to look out for, and maybe a guy for the Middle East to kind of represent the Middle East in the UFC as well. I've got Abdul-Kareem Al-Selwady to win this one here. I think Rodzhabov is going to gas out because Rodzhabov's cardio is really bad. That weight cut, must be really, really hard on him. I'm going to go Kareem Al-Selwady by 3rd round TKO or by decision. And now we can move on to the second fight. This fight was actually announced 6 hours ago. But of course, I did go out there and I did go and watch some tape on Benardo Sapai, who is from Sweden. And one thing I kind of like about this fight, to be fair, is the UFC just didn't sign some random guy that's 5-0 from the USA like they do sometimes. who's obviously not ready for the UFC. I think Bernardo Sapai is ready for the UFC, and I'm gonna probably talk about this fight for a little bit longer than I need to, but I think it's because this is a really fun fight, and I think Bernardo Sapai has a real chance of winning. Now, don't get me wrong, I am gonna pick Vinicius Oliveira, but I looked through at Bernardo Sapai, and Bernardo Sapai, I should say, sorry. There's a couple of things to be scared about if you're on the Vinicius Oliveira side, and this is actually why I probably wouldn't recommend betting on Vinicius Oliveira, because the way that Bernardo Sapai has won his last two fights have been capitalizing on mistakes that his opponents have made on the feet, which Vinicius Oliveira also makes. In this fight here against Julian Pierre Lopez, I know he knocks him out in 20 seconds, and you would just think that he just goes out there like a madman and just runs forward and knocks him out. That's not really what happened. Julian Pierre Lopez kind of just left himself open, overthrew a strike. Well, he was about to throw a strike, but the way that he kind of did it is he moved his head to the side, and Sapai just absolutely smacked him with a right hand and knocked him out faceplant out cold. And then this guy here, Giovanni Vargas, and this is where the concern comes to me in this matchup, is Giovanni Vargas did exactly what Vinicius Oliveira does, was he overthrew a combination, and in the middle of that combination, Sapai just once again smacks him with a right hand, knocks him down, and then after that, after a bit of ground and pound, which did go on for a few minutes, there was a little bit of grappling, but the point is he knocked him down with this laser right hand on the counter, in the middle of a combination which his opponent made the mistake by leaving himself open. And the reason why I don't like that in this matchup for Oliveira is that's all he does, man. All Oliveira does is leave himself open. And I feel like his Dana White's Contender Series fight is actually kind of the perfect example of this, because I actually didn't think he looked that good in his Contender Series fight, and I was very confident in him beating Madrigal. I thought it was the perfect matchup for him to win. Because if you do look at Vinicius Oliveira, on paper, he is incredibly exciting. You watch his fights, he looks really, really good. But there is one thing about him that is worrying. He leaves himself so open, man. And I feel like if you just want to watch one fight, watch that Contender Series fight. Yes, he does win the fight. But my goodness, dude, he's overthrowing everything. He swings, he leaves himself open. He kind of almost falls over. He's putting so much power on his punches. It's scary, man. Like, and the thing is as well, he's taking on a guy that's a boxer, because that's what Sapai does, but he is well-rounded. He can wrestle and grapple. He's taken on Sapai, who has proven to be a good counter-striker, has proven to have good power. Most of his wins are by KO in the first round, and he's not really just fighting guys that suck, you know? Like, he does have some wins over some good fighters. He does have some wins over some not-so-good fighters. But Sapai is a guy that people were asking to be in the UFC as well. You know, he's coming in from Sweden. To my knowledge, there's not many Swedish UFC fighters in the UFC, and MMA must be bigger in the UFC in Sweden than I thought it was, because Sapai is fighting in these like tiny little arenas, to be fair. Or I guess they're just kind of halls, like a town hall or something. But they are loaded, they are packed. So I feel like maybe Sapai, if he can beat Oliveira, he could be a bit of a star for Swedish MMA. But I've got to go with Oliveira, man. I think his aggression should kind of do it here. It's a short notice fight for Sapai. He was meant to fight next week, so he's going to be in shape. He's going to be ready. I don't know. I'm still a believer in Oliveira. I feel like Oliveira and Felipe dos Santos are kind of in a similar boat for me, whereas I think they're such good, amazing, fun prospects, but they're not that good. Like, I'm not really overhyping their skill set, because I'll be honest, Vinicius Oliveira, I'm worried, man. He just leaves himself so open, but at the same time, he's still so good. It's weird, because I feel like Sapai could kind of be the perfect guy to capitalize on that weakness, but I'm going to be picking Oliveira by KO. I think someone's getting knocked out here, and I think it's going to be Sapai, but if Sapai knocks out Oliveira, I'm not going to be surprised either. Give me Oliveira by KO in the first round. I think this fight is going to be an absolute war. Oliveira's got a little bit more tools on the feet. For me, I think Sapai, all he's got is his boxing and a head kick, whereas Oliveira does throw a little bit more. It's going to be interesting. Now we've got Christian Leroy Duncan taking on Claudio Ribeiro, and I feel like Claudio Ribeiro is once again going to be one of the more popular underdogs of the week, especially at this price tag now. If you've got CLD at minus 300, I wouldn't bet him at minus 300. I'm not even that confident in CLD, man. This is a low confidence pick. I am going to be picking him, but I'm a little bit worried about him, man. Like, I watched his fight, obviously, against Aiemann Petrosian, and he's just doing too much, man. Like, it's like he's he throws he throws his spinning attacks and he throws his punches and then he just kind of waits and he kind of puts his hands out there almost like he's doing some sort of like dance fight. It's just kind of like he's just doing too much, you know. Christian Leroy Duncan, all you need to do is, you know, just kind of do your kickboxing. You don't have to spin every third attack. You don't have to try and get a wheel kick KO every single time you throw a strike. And if you want to throw a flying knee every now and then, set it up and that's good. But he just does too much, man. Like, that's kind of what my problem with CLD is, and he doesn't look good on the back foot either because that's what he does. He spins, he does the spinning attacks, and he just does too much. Whereas Claudio Ribeiro, I think, is a lot more simple. Claudio Ribeiro is very sloppy, and he leaves himself very open, almost kind of like Vinicius Oliveira, but all Ribeiro's really got is his hands, his aggression, and nasty leg kicks, and those nasty leg kicks actually could lead him to a win over Christian Leroy Duncan, and I could actually see that happening. He went out there against Ivan Valenzuela. I'm pretty confident I did pick Ribeiro in that matchup. I wasn't confident in it, but he did get it done. I mean, knocked him out in 20 seconds, which was kind of cool. He lost to Abdul-Razak Al-Hassan, but in that first round was absolutely chewing up the legs, but of course, because he left himself so open, he ended up getting caught. KO Joseph Holmes. And then he lost to Roman Kopylov, who's just a better striker. But to be fair, Ribeiro was having a lot of success in that first round. I think Ribeiro's just too sloppy to lose to a guy, to beat a guy, like Christian Leroy Duncan. But Leroy leaves himself open as well, which is kind of like, I don't know, it's kind of like one of those things where if Christian Leroy Duncan loses, I'll be like, man, that's a big underdog I missed out on. But I think Christian Leroy Duncan's just too technical. As long as he keeps it simple, he should be able to beat Ribeiro, since Ribeiro leaves himself so open. I'm going to go with Leroy Duncan by KO. I'm a lot lower on Leroy Duncan than I was. I thought he was going to be a really, really good prospect for middleweight for England. But then the Armin Petrosian fights kind of just changed my entire view on him. Like, if he hadn't fought Petrosian, I would be very confident in CLD. But that performance against Petrosian was pretty bad. Now we've got Javid Basharat taking on Aiemann Zahabai. I've got to go with Javid Basharat. I mean, he's minus 700. I think he's just better than Aiemann Zahabai, to be honest with you. And I know that's a really, like, just terrible breakdown and a terrible take, but that's genuinely just how I see the fight. I think Javid Basharat is going to be the much better wrestler in this matchup, and I do actually think he's going to be the better striker in this matchup as well. I know that Aiemann Zahabai has had a pretty good win streak recently. He beat Draco Rodriguez, who is terrible, but he beat Ricky Tercios, who is okay, I guess. Tercios, like, I think he threw like 300 strikes and landed less than 10% of them in that fight. It's just weird. But then he knocked out Archie Lang, and I actually think Archie Lang's a pretty good fighter, to be fair. And he went out there and KO'd Archie Lang, which is a good performance. But Javid, I feel like this is almost a step down in competition. He obviously had that situation with Victor Henry, where I actually thought he'd kind of come off as like a... He come off as like a massive arsehole, to be honest, because he was saying that he won the fight and all this and how Victor Henry quit. But Victor Henry literally went to the hospital for that groin kick. Like, anyway, he struggled against... He didn't struggle against Matheus Mendonça. That's the wrong term. But Mendonça put on a relatively competitive fight against Basharat, and that win has aged really, really badly, to be fair. But he beat Tony Gravely, who was a very good wrestler in the UFC. And I think that Javid is just going to be able to use his well-roundedness to defeat Zahabai here. I mean, Zahabi's 36 years old. I feel like the UFC has seen that 3-fight win streak, and they're like, we don't want to have to give him the ranked opponent eventually, you know. To be honest, I think Javid's just better. He's minus 700. I wouldn't bet him at this price tag, to be honest. I'm seeing a lot of people doing like Javid, Umar, and Mokaev parlays, which I guess could work, but I mean, minus 700 and minus 1,000 odds aren't going to boost your parlay that much. I'm going to go Basharat. I'm going to go with decision. Hopefully he doesn't kick him in the groin and then blame Zahabai, which was just a weird situation in his last fight. Now we've got Ludovic Klein taking on AJ Cunningham, and yeah, I was about expecting these odds. I didn't know if they had odds out for this fight, and they do. I mean, AJ Cunningham, to be fair to him, he is a massive featherweight. He's coming up from featherweight to take this fight. Accepted this fight yesterday, I believe, so about 4 or 5 days notice. Good for him, but this is a nightmare matchup for AJ Cunningham, man. AJ Cunningham, he's good in the first round, but his cardio is really, really bad. And that's why I picked him to lose against Stephen Nguyen. But in that fight against Stephen Nguyen just absolutely smacked him up. And if you actually watch the tape on AJ Cunningham, he struggles against these opponents. Like, he didn't have a great performance against Shay Conley. He didn't have a great performance against Jason Mullen, before he got the finish. He's a grappler for the most part. His striking is pretty non-existent. His striking defense is non-existent. He is a guy that did fight at 145, but maybe the weight cut is kind of what slowed him down a bit, because now he's coming up to 155. I think his last fight was at 155, but it was against an 8-10 opponent. Like, you can't tell me anything about fighting a guy with a losing record as a guy that's meant to be UFC level. I think Ludwig Klein is just much, much better at striking than him, and I think AJ Cunningham is going to take more damage. I mean, he got absolutely smoked by Nguyen. Nguyen KO'd him twice, pretty much. He KO'd him at the end of the first round, and then he KO'd him again. I mean, AJ Cunningham's got a really interesting story if you wanted to look into it. It's actually kind of insane. I am very happy for him to be in the UFC, so I don't really mean to make fun of him like this, but he's been through a lot of hardship in his life, more hardship than I will see. But I think it's just such a bad matchup for him. I think Klein's going to knock him out. I think Klein's going to knock him out in the first or the second round. I know KOs aren't really what Klein does that much, but I mean, dude, he's just going to be so much of a better striker than Cunningham. And to be fair, though, Cunningham could grapple him, but Cunningham's cardio is not going to be good enough to hold up, so I think Klein's just going to KO him at some point. And now we've got Eric Anders versus Jamie Pickett, a fight that's happening and the featured prelim in 2024. And by the way, this was the card that the UFC was trying to sell to Saudi Arabia. And they had this fight as on the main card at the time. I mean, don't tell me you can't tell me they're not out of touch. I mean, why is this even the featured prelim? This should be the opening prelim. This card starts at 7 a.m. in New Zealand, I'm pretty sure. Starts at 7 a.m. I've got to wake up at 7 a.m. and then watch a bunch of fights to get to this. I could have woken up at 7:30 and missed this fight, but I've got to watch it anyway. I'm going to pick Eric Anders. Jamie Pickett's not UFC level. What more is there to say? He beat Joseph Holmes, which made me look like a right idiot. But all Jamie Pickett does is just clinch people up against the cage. Eric Anders is going to be stronger, the better striker, the better wrestler, the better grappler. That's kind of it. I mean, yeah, I'm just going to... What is this fight doing as the featured prelim in 2024? You can't tell me they're not out of touch. You just can't. And now you got Matt Schnell taking on Steve Erceg. Very fun fight. And to be fair to you, I actually think this isn't the best matchup for Erceg, because I could see Matt Schnell giving him a lot of problems, because Steve Erceg did struggle a little bit against Alessandro Costa. I believe it was a 29-28 decision, but you could tell that the power that Alessandro Costa was landing on him on the feet was starting to have a little bit of an effect and was kind of starting to bother Steve Erceg a little bit in that fight. But before that, he came in there on short notice against David Wojcik and just looked so good. He looked so good, man. Like, he just dominated, become the ranked opponent instantly. He is from Australia, so I am pretty familiar with him. I've actually kind of talked to his team before because I was very keen on getting him into the UFC. So I was just kind of asking, like, hey, do you know if the UFC is interested, this and that? Because I thought he was UFC level over a year ago, and then he came into the UFC and look at him now. But to be fair, the way that Steve Erceg wins fights is actually with his grappling, but in the UFC, he's shown off pretty good striking. He did have to beat Alessandro Costa by mixing it up with the wrestling, with the grappling. And Alessandro Costa, I know he's not ranked and he was a short notice opponent. Costa's no bum, man. Costa gave Amir Albazi problems in the first round. He actually outboxed Amir Albazi in the first round of their fight, and Costa's going to be a good fighter. I think he trains under Diego Lopez, so definitely could be a guy to keep your eye on. And Matt Schnell, I think Matt Schnell's not a bum either. The problem is, though, he hasn't fought in over a year. The last time he fought was against Mateus Nicolau, and then before that he fought Sumadeji, and he took a lot of damage in that one, man. He got absolutely boxed up. Sumadeji made a mistake on the ground, and then obviously Matt Schnell got the win. But Nicolau smacked him as well. So 2 KO losses within about 5 months. Well, not KO losses, but 2 technically KO damage kind of fights in 5 months. And then before that, he took damage against Royval. Matt Schnell's got a really bad chin at 125, but he's actually a really good fighter. Matt Schnell's actually probably one of the better fighters in this weight class if he had a better chin, but he just doesn't. And Steve Erceg isn't a guy that I would say has KO power, because to be fair, I wouldn't say it's fair to say that he does. I think he did drop Dvorak at one point, but Erceg isn't a guy that I'm just going to pick to KO guys at 125. I'm going to pick him to win by submission against guys, and I think he beats Matt Schnell by submission late in the fight. I think Schnell actually is going to have a lot of success early, because I do think he's a really good fighter, and Steve Erceg may be a little bit of a slow starter. from his last fight there, but I think Erceg eventually is going to be able to get the wrestling going, get the grappling going. I think he wins the second round, and I think he submits in the third round. So give me Erceg by submission late in the fight. And now Umar Nurmagomedov taking on Bekzat Almakhan. One thing that I actually kind of appreciate from pretty much everyone on YouTube is you can tell people have actually watched tape on this fight. Because a lot of the time I can watch videos, most guys are pretty good, but some guys you can tell don't watch tape because when they've got a guy making their debut like Bekzat Almakhan, you can tell that they haven't watched a single fight and they're just kind of making stuff up. But everyone that I've seen obviously has watched tape on Almakhan because everyone says that Umar is a really good fighter, but minus 1200 is a pretty steep price tag for him in this fight. And Bekzat Almakhan is no bum, and that's what everyone's saying, man. Everyone's saying that Bekzat Almakhan is a really good fighter and he's a really good striker, which is exactly what he is. I mean, you can look at his topology and kind of tell from that, but you can't really tell except if you watch his fights. You can watch his fights. Dude, this guy's good, man. Like, Bekzat Almakhan, I think he's going to have a lot of success in the UFC, even though I think he loses to Umar Nurmagomedov, which, you know, Umar's like a ranked guy. He was meant to fight against Corey Sandhagen. Corey Sandhagen has said that he would fight Umar if he looks good against Bekzat Almakhan. So maybe if Bekzat Almakhan beats Umar, he could fight Corey Sandhagen next, which would be crazy. But yeah, I'm going to be picking Umar Nurmagomedov in this one here. I actually think it's going to be just kind of a Umar wrestle sort of fight because I think Bekzat, although he's probably not as technical at striking as Umar, he's still really good at striking. You can tell by watching all of these fights here. I actually have made a separate video on this one here where I kind of broke down the fight a lot more in detail. But Bekzat Almakhan, you know, against Mauro Mastroianni. In this fight here, Bekzat Almakhan was just boxing him up, kickboxing him up, I guess you could say. And the whole time he had to defend takedowns from Mauro, who was just constantly spamming takedowns on him, and he showed really good takedown defense. But is Mauro as good at wrestling as Umar Nurmagomedov? I'm going to say no. And the same thing against Jan Faraz as well. You know, Jan Faraz was constantly trying to take him down, and Bekzat Almakhan was actually able to reverse a couple takedowns and was able to win the fight that way as well. Bekzat's really good at striking, man, but I think Umar's just kind of going to fight the fight similarly to the Nate Maness fight, which you're not going to want to hear because that fight was really boring, man. It was really boring, but I think that's what's going to happen because I think Bekzat, he actually might have a moment or two in the matchup, to be fair. And that's what I think Jacob from We Want Pick said. He said that I think that Bekzat might actually be able to knock down Umar in the hole, and everyone just goes, oh my goodness. But then Umar's going to take over and win the fight, which I think probably does happen. But I think Bekzat, he's no bum, man. Like, and I wouldn't be parlaying Umar at minus 1200 because you're not going to boost your odds by like anything. You know, I don't know. I'm picking Umar. To be fair, it's actually a pretty high confidence pick in Umar. But I just want to warn you guys, man. Like don't put down Umar in every single parlay to get that little boost. You know, it's not worth it at minus 1200. It's just not. And now we got Alex Perez taking on Muhammad Mokaev. And I'm not very confident in Mokaev in this fight, man. I feel like if you actually watch Mokaev's fights, he's not looking that good, man. Like against Tim Elliott on 2 of the judges' scorecards, Tim Elliott won the first 2 rounds against Mokaev. Mokaev, if he didn't get that submission, would have lost that fight to Tim Elliott. And then before that, he beat Jafal Filho. Jafal Filho pretty much tore his leg off in that matchup and looked pretty good with the grappling there. And then before that, Malcolm Gordon was giving him problems on the feet, man. Like what are we doing? Like, Malcolm Gordon looked really good in that fight. You know, he actually gave Muhammad Mokaev, and in fact, whenever that fight was on the feet, Malcolm Gordon was having a lot of success. And, like, you know, Mokaev is a really good prospect, don't get me wrong. I think he went 23-0 as an amateur. But, man, I'm worried about him. I think he's going to lose eventually. Do I think he loses to Alex Perez? No. The last time Alex Perez won a fight, I was 17 years old. Holy shit, that's a long time ago. Yeah, I was only 17 years old the last time Alex Perez won a fight. It's kind of all you got to really say. I mean, just pulls out of fights. There's a lot going on, I guess, in his life, maybe, for him just to not show up. But one thing I will say is if Muhammad Mokaev doesn't respect Alex Perez and doesn't wrestle him, I think he's going to get knocked out. I genuinely believe that. Because Mokaev, he struggled on the feet. So, like, all of his opponents, really, like, he's just a really, really good wrestler. I mean, the moments that the fight was on the feet against Charles Johnson was having success. Alex Perez's last fight was just that little 40, I think it was like 40 seconds scrappy ass. They just kind of engaged in the pocket, and then Pantoja got the back and got the submission. But yeah, I think I'm gonna pick Mokaev. It's like a medium confidence in Mokaev, but it's just another warning, guys. Like, just don't go crazy there. You know, I know that Alex Perez hasn't really been fighting at all. Like, what is he doing? You know, these guys aren't even in the UFC anymore. But yeah, Perez is gonna be the better striker, and that's something to worry about. But Mokaev, I think, is gonna be able to take him down at will. I think he's gonna be able to break him, and I think he's gonna be able to finish him in round 2 or 3. But if Mokaev doesn't respect Perez and he just strikes with him, I think there's problems there, man. To be honest. And now Vitor Petrino is taking on Tyson Pedro. I'm going to be picking Vitor Petrino. Actually, I think I've picked every single favorite thus far. But I'm not really mad about it because literally everyone else is kind of doing that too. Pedro is another underdog that I have seen people kind of picking. But I think Petrino is just going to be a little bit better than him, man. Like, I know Tyson Pedro went on that massive run after he came out of nowhere. He KO'd Ike Villanueva, who wasn't UFC level. KO'd Harry Hunsucker, who wasn't UFC level, and then lost to Modestas Bukauskas, but apparently he was sick, but Bukauskas took him on short notice there, and he beat Anton Turkalj, who unfortunately isn't UFC level, man. I thought Anton Turkalj was so much better than he actually is. It's kind of rough. But anyway, Vitor Petrino, man, you know, he beat Anton Turkalj in a decision, but then since then, I think that Vitor Petrino has actually been showing rapid improvements because he's become a much more well-rounded fighter. When he came in on the Contender Series against Bellato, he was purely a striker. And then all of a sudden he starts wrestling against Turkalj, and I'm like, what? He starts wrestling against Prachnio, which kind of annoyed me because I think he could have KO'd Prachnio. So many opportunities in that fight, and he just chose to wrestle. But then he looked really good against Bukauskas, kind of mixing it all up again. I think he kind of could do that against Pedro, but the problem is Pedro is a grappler. That's what he actually is for the most part. I know he's KOing guys silly, but Pedro is a grappler. That's what he's best at doing. He's best at finding submissions. And I do worry that if Vitor Petrino goes out there and he takes down Tyson Pedro, I think he could get submitted. He really could, because Pedro's no bum on the ground, man. Like, that's what he does. That's what makes him dangerous. But now he's added so much striking with the time that he's kind of had off. So Pedro is a well-rounded fighter. These guys are both well-rounded fighters, even though most people would assume that they're only strikers. I think that Vitor Petrino, though, if he's going to keep any fight on the feet, it should just be this one, because I think he catches Pedro before Pedro catches him, to be honest with you. One thing that's clear about Petrino is he has a lot of power. If you watch his fight against if you watch his fight against Marcin Prachnio, Prachnio is landing flush shots on him, and they're not bothering Petrino. But every time Petrino lands a flush shot on Prachnio, he gets a massive reaction out of him. And Petrino gave Prachnio a lot of issues on the feet in that matchup, and then chose to wrestle, but he eventually got the submission, which is cool. But man, he frustrated me, because I was like, Petrino, you could knock him out, man. You could knock him out in round 1 if you wanted to. Anyway, I think Petrino knocks out Pedro. I think that's kind of what it comes down to. I think is on the feet. I think it comes down to who catches who first. And I do think Petrino can catch Pedro before Pedro catches him. But if the fight gets down to the ground, because I think Petrino might try and take it there, Pedro will probably try and take it there as well. It could get interesting, because I think in the pure grappling, Pedro is going to be the better grappler. Petrino can wrestle. It's obviously something he's been working on. But yeah, I think Petrino is going to be able to get it done here against Pedro by KO. Pedro, I mean, like, at one point, I think Pedro was minus 800 odds on guys. So I don't know, there's maybe a good opportunity to get Pedro as a massive underdog here if you like Pedro, but I've still got to pick Petrino anyway. And then we've got the main event, which a lot of people are split on. I completely understand why people would pick Rozenstruik, and I'm going to make it another all-favorites card. I think this is 3 in a row. Last week, though, to be fair, I picked 2 underdogs that flipped to favorites with, obviously, line movement of people betting on them. But yeah, the week before that, it was an all-favorites card. This week, it's also an all-favorites card. I'm picking Gaziev. But man, this is low confidence. This is my lowest confidence pick on the entire card. I'm just going to have to kind of start it like this. Shamil Gaziev. What is he good at? He's really good at wrestling, and he's got a lot of power. But what's he bad at? He's got no cardio, and he's got no striking defense. That's why a lot of people are picking Rozenstruik, is if you actually watch the tape on Gaziev, he's looked really good in the UFC and on the Contender Series. I mean, he dropped Greg Velasco, and then Velasco somehow took his back, I think, immediately. It was so weird. But before that, against Darko Stosic, who is a pretty good fighter now. I think he fights for KSW, but he fought for Brave, obviously, in that one there. Stosic dropped him. You know, Stosic was able to knock him down. Gaziev was kind of moving forward, doing what he does, and he got dropped. And if he fights, honestly, any longer than 90 seconds on the feet with Rozenstruik without shooting a takedown, I'm going to start to panic. Because Gaziev's striking defense doesn't exist. And Rozenstruik's a really good kickboxer. I think his record in kickboxing is something to do with, like, along the ratio of, like, 80 wins to 10 losses. He was a really good kickboxer when he was a kickboxer. He came into MMA, and one thing that Rozenstruik has kind of proven to do is he struggles against wrestlers, man. You know, he struggled against Almeida, but that's Almeida, to be fair. But he lost to Volkov by KO. He lost to Blades by decision. But in these matchups against wrestlers, Rozenstruik, he becomes the frozen strike. He doesn't throw punches, man, because he's a counter puncher. But you can't really do that against Shamil Gaziev, because I think Gaziev's just going to be kind of shooting for takedowns. But as long as this fight's on the feet, someone's getting KO'd. So not someone's getting KO'd. I think Gaziev's getting KO'd. So it's kind of one of those fights where you're picking Gaziev if you think that he's going to be able to wrestle, and if you think that he's going to be able to finish Rozenstruik in the ground in the first 2 rounds, because other than that, he's going to gas out. And then if you're picking Rozenstruik, you're either picking him to land on Gaziev early, or just survive the first couple of rounds, and then just finish a gassed out Gaziev with his much more superior striking. But I do believe that Gaziev's a really good wrestler. He's training with a good team. I think Gaziev's going to lose eventually. I think if he gets past Rozenstruik, but I think he loses the matchup after that. I think if he gets past Rozenstruik, I don't really know what the rankings look like, but I think if he takes on someone like Volkov, he's going to get absolutely smashed. I think Taito Ivasa would knock him out. Who else is in the ranking? Marcin Tybura, I think, would beat Gaziev as well. I think he would get past that fraud. What's that fraud's name? Romanov. I think he would beat Romanov, though, to be fair. That might be the best move for the UFC to kind of do that. Him versus Romanov from Bahrain or something like that. I'm going to pick Gaziev. Very low confidence pick. I mean, as I kind of broke it down, it just comes down to whether or not you think Gaziev can wrestle. And I think he can. He's very good at wrestling. He hasn't really shown it off in the UFC, which is scary. Didn't really show much intention to wrestle against Boudet, which is scary. But yeah, I think Gaziev is going to be able to wrestle Rozenstruik. I think he's a good fighter, man. I really do. But man, his striking defense is so bad. You just gotta worry, man. You just gotta worry. But let me know what you think of those picks in the comments below. I know I just picked every single favorite on the card, but you can't really blame me too much. Everyone else is doing that, and as I have stated before, I don't just pick people because of the odds. I actually pick people on who I think is going to win. And I'm not going to pick someone I don't think wins, really, to be honest. But anyway, let me know what you think in the comments below, and I'll see you guys in the next one.